Esche, everyone. Estongo, Amber Chehotep Kudos. Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Lakota Law, for having me. Before I get started, I do want to recognize that I am on Kalapuya land, also known as Portland, Oregon. So I want to give a shout out to my Kalapuya relatives and other tribes in the Pacific Northwest. And I also want to acknowledge that at one time, Oregon was also known as the white man's paradise and excluded Black folks through legislation such as sundown laws and many other ways. Keeping Black folks out of Oregon. And a lot of those laws didn't come off the books till relatively recently. So I just want to recognize that, the work that I do is very intersectional. I'm always thinking about the ways in which the settler state is a very white supremacist and anti-Black and anti-Indigenous project. And so that is the work that I do, is trying to have these very nuanced conversations about how Black folks and Native folks, our liberation and our sovereignty is very much interconnected. And a couple months ago, I had the privilege, the honor to write a piece for the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture. This article gave me a chance to really express what I'm thinking and what I mean when I speak up to Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignties. So I'll go ahead and read it, and then I'll have a quick chat, and then let's continue this conversation online and, like I said, in our communities. What is Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty? I ask myself this question regularly and have spent countless hours reading and digesting the work of scholars and academics, thought leaders and activists, community organizers, and peers, folks who do and live and have lived this work, who dream and have dreamt up technologies of resistance, and who have translated those ideas into research, books, opinions, think pieces, arts, and community-led movements. It is in this question that I have developed my politics and have gained a greater understanding of what sovereignty and liberation are. And it is by regularly returning to this question that I have found the boldness to speak to the idea of an authentic, sovereign Indigenous future and a fully realized Black liberated future. Not, however, as an authority on either subject, but as a Black and Native person who is deeply invested in both of my communities, as a willing participant in these movements of refusal. Ultimately, it is my hope to contribute something genuine to the discourse and something tangible to the work that progresses us forward towards that which is actually possible. Therefore, my present understanding of Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty is grounded in the notion that white supremacy, settler colonialism, and racial capitalism must be interrogated and dismantled. That an authentic, sovereign Indigenous future is rooted in the fundamental belief that Indigenous peoples globally have the inherent right to self-governance, self-determination, and political and social autonomy. That the contemporary land back movement is an articulation of our absolute right to be in relation with the land and to steward it as in the days of our ancestors, where the land is set free from capitalism and commodification, where it is no longer deemed private property as a means of delegitimizing Indigenous people's relationship with it. A sovereign Indigenous future is also one where our epistemologies and understanding of the natural world are honored and respected as legitimate scientific knowledge. It is also a future where the violence of white supremacy and the ongoing policies of settler colonialism no longer contribute to the erasure and the genocide of our tribes, nations, communities, or family. Additionally, a fully realized Black liberated future, in my opinion, is one rooted in the fundamental belief that Black people globally are also sovereign and have the right to self-determination and autonomy, where our bodies and our lives are no longer commodities of white supremacy and racial capitalism, but instead belong to us to do as we please with them, where our health outcomes, quality of life, and life experience are not determined by our positionality within this racialized hierarchy, where our indigeneity to the lands of our ancestors is also recognized and affirmed, where proximity to whiteness is of no value and European beauty standards don't supersede our own acceptance of Black beauty and love for self, where we bask in our cultures and ways of existing while rejecting the gaze and limitations thrust upon us by those who'd rather see our demise than see us free. And finally, where our humanity is fully realized. Additionally, I fundamentally believe our arrival at Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty will certainly require us to remember who we are outside of our oppression, outside of our oppressors' institutions, ideologies, and imaginations. It is a future that will ask us to internalize and embody the notion that subjugation is neither our birthright nor our inheritance. It will demand that we forfeit any loyalties to our current positioning and divest from any misguided belief that this is our lot. It is not. Our destination of freedom will also challenge us to see ourselves and one another as worthy of something better than this. If we expect to achieve this future, it will be our responsibility as Black folks and as Native peoples to continue the work of those who came before us, to deconstruct the colonizer and oppressor in our hearts, in our communities, and in our understanding of the world with intentionality, to dismantle institutions that dehumanize us and refuse ideologies of systems that seek to commodify and profit off of our oppression. It is imperative that we remember that both of our peoples have always been the authors and of our liberation and the architects of our deliverance. That our ancestors were never passive in their subjugation, but instead active participants in their fight towards freedom. That is the legacy we have been entrusted with. So as contemporary stewards of this work, it is our responsibility to continue imagining the future fought for by our predecessors while simultaneously envisioning a world and a future more brilliant than that our oppressors have planned for us. It is also my hope that as we build this future, prepare to inhabit it, and leave it to our descendants as inheritance, that we understand the value of solidarity and community. Within community and between communities, as I absolutely believe that Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty are compatible movements of freedom. Black and Native folks have had to navigate this white supremacist, settler, colonial, and racial capitalist projects for hundreds of years, both independently and also in cooperation. Without romanticizing our past, we must understand that there have been moments of authentic solidarity, as well as moments of lateral harm and violence. There have been moments of victory and moments of failure. Both of our peoples understand that existing within these systems has been hard. It has been brutal, unrelenting work. And through it all, our oppressors have always sought to pit us against one another. They have at times even required us to stand in for them against one another. These are the realities we must be honest about, and it is our responsibility as Black folks and as Native peoples to acknowledge and address these harms, to talk through them, to try to see one another instead of erasing one another, to contextualize all this that we may find a way to empathize with one another. Ultimately, we should want more for one another instead of seeking to replicate the evils and violence of our oppressors, as we understand what it means to have to endure under these systems and should, therefore, want no person to ever share in such misery. And while I believe it is for Black folks and Native people to lead the way and to be active participants in building our future, I think it's equally important for non-Black and non-Native peoples to participate as well. Everyone has a responsibility to divest from anti-Blackness and to respect Indigenous sovereignty and specifically tribal sovereignty. And for those who carry the political, legal, and social currency of whiteness and benefit from these systems that oppress and attempt to stifle the future of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, I believe it is their responsibility to use their currency to dismantle said systems with the intention of forfeiting their privilege and positionality within this hierarchy. Finally, I will admit that sometimes I'm overly a hopeful person, but I have learned to temper that hope with reality. So while I have hope in Black folks and Native peoples, I don't expect perfection from us. I understand that in an attempt to build community and consensus, we will be challenged. Doing this together will absolutely be hard work. We will undoubtedly make mistakes and we will disagree. There may even be times where we don't like one another, but none of those obstacles are reasons to stop pursuing what we deserve: Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty. So here's to our future. My hope in having these conversations is for us to really hear each other, to listen to one another, to build consensus. My hope is that, having these conversations will build solidarity, like authentic solidarity. And I know that that's a word that gets thrown around a lot online, but I think solidarity is rooted in community. It's rooted in us having discussions with one another and humanizing one another and listening to one another when we say this hurts, like believing one another. Seeing a lot of the work that other Black and Indigenous people are doing online is showing me that, like, we are headed somewhere different than this. Like, we are planting seeds so that our descendants will be able to reap the harvest, just like we are currently, reaping the harvest of the work that came before us. But this is work, right? And this is something that we'll have to invest in. If we really want to dismantle this system, we have to also look, across communities and see the other harms that happen in other communities and find out how we can support one another. So I think that is all I'd like to share for today. I'm really hopeful that these conversations can continue. I'm really excited about the work that's being done here today and every day. And so I hope that you'll join me online and other Native and Black folks online who are trying to do this work and trying to realize a future outside of white supremacy, settler colonialism, and racial capitalism. Mado, and thank you for having me.